Welcome back to Chaos and Carry Ons. November is Adoption Awareness Month, and this week we're diving into your biggest questions about adoption. Everything from home studies, wait times, to foster to adopt, and how to support families in the process.
This episode isn't about my son's story specifically, though if you missed our earlier episode about Mateo's adoption, go back and listen to that one. Today is about adoption in general, the process, the misconceptions, and what it really looks like for families walking on this road.
So grab your coffee, get comfy, and let's get into your questions. All right, let's start with one of the most common questions. How different was Mateo's adoption versus having your biological children and the bonding that happens between childbirth and adoption?
I feel like this is probably people's most not asked but most want to know question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the most wondered.
Yeah, because people definitely wonder this, but very few people are brave enough to say, is it the same when they hand you the baby? Is it the same? Because if you've had a biological child, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the feeling that you get when they hand you this baby. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they're asking me this because they want to validate it, especially somebody who's never experienced labor and giving birth. They want me to say it's the same. There's nothing that's different because I feel like they want me to heal something in them. Ultimately, that's what they're wanting because they're not going to get this experience. But when they handed me my girls, I felt the instant bond to them. And I just want to say and put a little disclaimer in here. Not everybody does. There's multiple people that have talked about, even to me, that when they handed them their biological children, it was a bonding process and not immediate. You know, that's a thing. Mm-hmm. And so I just want you to keep that in mind, that each child was also different for me, even my two biological children, because when you've never been a mother before, Shelby knows this, she's had a child, it's overwhelming at some points. Would you say that in the first?
Oh, definitely.
You know, because you don't know what you're doing and you know a little bit more of what you're doing the second time. But this is the best way that I can describe it. So 9 months puking every single day or being pregnant, you feel like when they hand you this baby, I deserve this. I've worked for this. This is my reward. I even remember when they had taken away Harper for a while to just kind of like check some of her signs. And I remember I was looking over at her and the doctor said, bring her back that baby because she's worked so hard for that, because I had a very rough pregnancy. Both of my kids were rough pregnancies. So this immediately was different because I was not in the room when Mateo was born. But so here's another thing, and I'm going to talk about this when we do Mateo's birth episode, but I did not get to come into the room until he was like 2 days old. And there's this feeling of like, you're looking around the room, which baby is mine? Which baby is mine? Like your mind is moving at 1,000,000 miles a minute. And that's what's going through your mind is I'm about to see my baby for the first time. I will never, ever, as long as I live, I will never forget the feeling of seeing Mateo for the very first time. His little tiny head, I just saw the back of his head and realizing this is it. This is my baby. And then seeing him, and when they handed him to me, I had never in my life felt such a gratitude, and I don't deserve this. I was actually saying that out loud. Lord, I do not deserve this. I have never done anything in my life to deserve a gift like this. So that is what I will say. Now, people that went through infertility and things like that, they probably have a similar feeling of like this is a gift. They probably have a deeper understanding that not everybody gets to have a child, that this truly is a gift. You know, like if you've never had infertility, like up until that point, I had not, you don't really understand that. So, but even when you're having infertility and you've had the baby, you've still put in the hard work. You've still done it. There is just something to be said about, I've done nothing in my life. This woman has picked me to be this child's mother. You feel so undeserving of it. The bond is there. Like I said, I'll never forget seeing him for the first time. And I even remember texting Derek. We didn't get to be there at the same time because it was COVID. And I texted him and said, I can't remember exactly the words I used, but how's it going? What do you think? Whatever. And his text back to me was, I've felt this twice before. That's what he said. I've felt this twice before. So it's the same bond feeling. And you can't describe that to somebody, you know. How do you feel so connected to this little being that you didn't even know about, you know, a few days ago? Like, but you do. They feel just, you love them so much. But I can say that I did not feel undeserving of my 2 biological children. I hope that makes sense to people. Mm-hmm. But when you're seriously considering adoption, people think that is the hardest part, is to bond to your non-biological child. And that is the easiest part of the entire it feels like all the work that you've put in for the papers, like everything has been totally worth it. You know, like here you are, you've gotten here, you made it. Like, I just can't even believe that this is really happening, is really how you feel.
That made me teary-eyed. That was so beautifully said.
I know that people want to know it. And I don't want to make it out like adoption is like rainbows and unicorns, because it's not. Like, it's coming from so much like trauma and heartbreak, and it's awful to think that somebody cannot raise their biological child. That is a terrible thought. But to think that somebody cannot raise their biological child and they're saying, I trust you, please take care of them, that's a beautiful thing.
So I didn't realize we were going in so deep right off the beginning. But I'm glad that you said that, because I think, like you said, that's something that a lot of people wonder, but are too scared to ask. And maybe you've wondered it, but you've never even thought to ask somebody. So going into the next question, how long does the adoption process take from start to finish? This was very highly requested. I had multiple people tell me that they wanted to make sure this was on the adoption Q&A, because that's another question that I feel like most people have, is what's the timeline look like?
Yeah. And this one is tricky because it varies so much. Like, there's so many factors that are going into play here. So for some, it can be like a few months. For some, it can be like a few years. It's going to depend on if you're going through an agency, foster care, the state you live in, even down to the agency that you're picking. Now we're talking about my adoption here. So if you're going through an agency, they can generally tell you what their average wait time has been. For my adoption specifically, and I might have said it in the last episode, I started the adoption process of just looking for an agency in February. I signed on to an agency in September. I was what they call matched in February, and he was born in February.
So 1 year.
Yeah. It was about a year. From the time that I started looking for an agency to the time that he was born, it was a year. From the time that my home study was done until the time that he was born was 6 months.
So patience is the name of the game.
Yes, it is. My consultant used to say, blessed are the flexible, because you need to have patience and you need to be flexible. Things change. I mean, on a dime they change. And especially during COVID times, nobody knew what they were doing.
I feel like that's something that people don't realize about and I didn't until I watched you go through it, but there's so much waiting between the paperwork and like the what ifs and maybes and all the praying that goes on behind the scenes. I mean, it's not just and I say that, but I mean, I guess you could be presented with situations where it is fast and it's just days instead, but there's so much back and forth that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. I've made multiple friends in the adoption world since Mateo's been born. It's really good and very important to have friends around you that are walking in the journey, have walked through the journey, their kids are grown. And then you'll find people that are starting that will ask you questions, and then they'll kind of, they'll start on the journey with you. And it's really, really important to surround yourself with people that have walked it. But you will notice that nobody's adoption is just like yours. And you have to do what you feel is best for your child. I cannot stress that enough. There is no one size fits all. And nobody that I know has even the same timeline. I know somebody that they did their home study and they were matched 2 weeks later and the baby was born that 2 weeks later. The baby was already born 2 weeks and then the baby was there. Can you even imagine it?
No.
Yeah. I know somebody that it was like 3 months. I know somebody that it took 2 years. So that's what I'm saying. It can be all over the place. So you need to be prepared to basically just expect the unexpected.
So another question that came in a lot was, should we go through foster care to adopt or use an agency? And I think people were asking too specifically if you did foster care before you adopted Mateo and what that situation looked like too.
Yeah. So I did get several questions on, was Mateo biologically related to me and did he come through foster care? And the answer is no to both of those. We've never done foster care and he was not biologically related to us. So there's no right answer. It really depends on your heart, the family dynamic, what kind of adoption that you feel called to. Foster to adopt is incredible. I have so much respect for anybody that does it. It comes with a lot of uncertainty because the goal of foster care is reunification first, and they will preach that to you. Now, to be fair, though, they need people in foster care that are willing to adopt. I mean, that's just the hard truth of it. So if you pick that to adopt, I have the utmost respect for you because even though the goal is reunification, the sad, hard truth of it is a lot of those children will have to be adopted because there's no other choice for them. So,
but there is a chance that the child may go back to their biological family. And I feel like that's what I hear the hardest part is, and that's how I know I would be that way if I were to foster because you can't not grow attached to a child when you're sharing your home and your life with them. But at the end of the day, what's best for that child is what's best.
Yeah, exactly. Families who feel passionate about helping the kids, whether short-term, long-term, it's an amazing way. Agencies, on the other hand, tend to focus on a private adoption, and domestic and international adoptions. It's more structured, but it's also more expensive.
So it's not really an either or. It's just what fits your family's season and calling.
Right. I always tell people, research. You really need to pray about this and talk to other families that have done each path. Like I said, foster care, we need more foster care families, good families. That's just the truth. We do. I actually heard somebody that's a foster mother say that people say, like you said, you get attached to these kids. And she said, that's exactly what these kids need is attachment. You know, you hear attachment issues. And she said, we need people that are willing to get attached. I never thought about it that way until she said that. But that's absolutely the truth. She said, like, they deserve that. And they do. So they need good, willing families to, quote, get attached, you know.
So let's talk about the question that everyone's scared to ask. And maybe not. I don't know. I would be too scared to ask. I mean, I've asked you, but I would be too scared to ask anybody else. How much does adoption cost?
Most people are not afraid to ask me how much adoption costs, and I
Really?
don't.
That surprises me because I asked you like as your best friend. I mean, I don't know that I even asked you. I just think it's something that we've talked about, but
Yeah.
there's not many people at all that I would feel comfortable enough asking that.
Well, people definitely ask me, and if you ask me, I will give you a range of what is average and normal, because I do not like to put a number on it, because that makes me feel like Mateo was just like a number,
price tag.
and he is so much more than that. It can, again, it's a range. So domestic private adoption through an agency is running anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000. It really depends on where the agency is. You think like, where in the world could it be $100,000? Well, California, New York. I think like I've seen a lot of like 80s. Where are your lower costs is probably what you're thinking. Okay, well, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, a lot in the South, and especially if you're doing what they call a private match. A lot of times that can even be like through a lawyer and not an agency. Those are much lower costs. So let me just also throw it out there. Foster to adopt is generally free. The state that you live in will pay for that.
And I want to add in here too that there are grants, tax credits, and organizations that help with the financial side. I know this because of your experience, but also we were doing paperwork through Jordan's work when I was diagnosed with cancer, like insurance policies and stuff like that. And they actually have an adoption credit through his work. And I thought that was really cool that they offered that.
Adoption tax credit is like a huge help, and there are a lot of nonprofit adoption grants that you can apply for. It means extra paperwork filling out, but especially if you go through an agency, they usually have a list of grants that you can apply for.
So the moral of the story is don't let the cost scare you away, because there is help to be had.
Yes, and I always say, and I have a friend that says this too that's adopted, do not let the fear of I can't afford this scare you from adoption, because if it is meant to be, like she says, the money will come. You don't know how, but it will come. If that is meant to be your baby, it will work out.
So one of my favorite listener questions was, what is something that you wish more people understood about adoption?
Like I said, adoption is very complex, and every adoption starts with a hard decision. And it's such a hard thing, because I think you really learn that you hear people say there can be grief at the same time that there can be joy, or there's joy and grief. You'll hear people say that those two things can coexist at the same time. But adoption to me puts that on complete display. It's grief and it's joy. And I think that's one of the things that you don't expect to feel is the grief. And I hear people in the adoption world talk about, I didn't know I was going to go through a depression, almost like a postpartum depression. And people that have never experienced adoption probably think that sounds silly, because what could you possibly be depressed about? Well, adoption can be traumatic. You're walking with somebody that's making this hard decision, and you're feeling a lot of empathy, especially if you are an empathist like I am. You're like feeling their feelings, and that's really hard to process, and you feel very guilty. I know I talked about this too on the last episode. You realize how easily your life could have been different, and I think that's probably the most misunderstood thing about adoption, is that it's not just like a rainbows and unicorns thing, like for the adoptive family. I feel like now too, people villainize the adoptive families, like you're taking these babies from their mothers. I've talked to Shelby about it before. People say it's very expensive, I don't want to pay, it should all go through the state. But nobody wants the state involved in everything in your life. You just don't. And, you you don't really want this. You don't want a mother having to go through the state to place her child. Like, no, I feel bad saying this, but it's like right now, it's like nobody trusts like anything that's really is going on. And
It's
so
true.
why would you force somebody to have to do that? You know what I mean? It's just the hard reality, and people have a job to do and they have to be paid. So
Yep.
I wish that people understood that too about adoption.
So for anyone listening who's considering adoption or supporting someone who is, what would you tell them?
Yeah, when people ask me where to start, I tell them reach out to families that you know that have adopted. Like I said, people that have just adopted, talk to people that's kids are older. I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of podcasts, listened to adoptees, birth moms, and adoptive families. They call it the adoption triad, and there's no rush. You could take years, really, if you wanted to learn about adoption and see what you feel comfortable with doing. But I think the main thing is, like I said, if you feel called to adoption, do not let anything that I said scare you, because I'm telling you, like I said, that first time that you see your baby, you feel like my whole life has been leading up to this. This is where I was meant to do.
Mm-hmm. If you're in that waiting season, we're sending you so much love. The waiting can feel endless, but the story unfolding on the other side is worth it.
I hope the Q&A gave you some answers, some encouragement, maybe even the nudge to start asking more questions.
Adoption isn't one size fits all. It's a beautiful mix of heartbreak, hope, and healing. And if you're walking through it, you're not alone.
So thanks for listening. Next week, we'll be sharing more stories that highlight Adoption Awareness Month.
Until then, may your flights be on time, your paperwork get approved quickly, and your hearts stay open to the unexpected.
Because that's where the fun begins.